Okay, so rendering value with the markers as well as the pens. It's a simple value ramp. It's a light to dark transition. You don't have to start it with a technical pen. If you like, you can also start it with the your lightest value marker. You could start that way as well. Building out the box just makes it to where you're locked into specific confines, so that you don't just make a long, crazy value transition that may be bigger than you need to. You can make these fairly small, enough to practice building the transitions. So you can see the start that there is a pull and a release, and it's mostly to allow some of the dryness of the marker to build up some of the transition. So it's not just solely using it heavily. The most important part about any of this value transition rendering is that it's nearly always going to be just trying to practice touch. So building these value ramps and doing value studies is not really designed to do immaculate, impressive work. More than anything else, is designed to help you to start building up your the physical part of making marks. One of the more important elements of when you're working with markers, you do want to put a layer in between the next page, because the markers 100% bleed through, and that bleed through will end up on the next page. And then when you're drawing, either you'll have to avoid it, or you'll end up having just those value transitions in the way of the next drawing you do, or you have to skip that page. Either or, there's lots of solutions. But I forgot at the beginning to get a little sheet of tracing paper and put it underneath there in between the pages to cut down on some of that bleed through. So when we look at the light and the dark in here, the lighter part of this is going to be the paper, and then you do the very light marker, and then you do your middle value marker, and then you do your darkest marker. Eventually I decided that I would use the brush side and do a little bit of stippling, which is basically making tiny little dots that are greater in distance as they get further away from the area of where it's dark. And in this case, the stippling was all risk drawing. Because I started thinking to myself, ooh, I'd like to maybe build up a slightly more smooth transition. And because these markers are alcohol based markers, every time you draw back over them with a lighter marker, you're basically creating a little bit of a soft blend. The only issue that you potentially run into when you're trying to create those soft blends is that you're really overworking the paper potentially, and what you could end up with is a lot of bleed. So if you're drawing with your marker and you keep going over and over the same areas, you'll see that the edges get a little bit fuzzy. And as long as you know and you're aware of that, you can always go back in and use your technical pens to shore up some of the areas where it gets it might get a little fuzzy. You don't have to do the stippling part of this. You could keep a little bit of the brush work and the markers to build up your value. But if you do, and you want to practice just creating a little stipple detail to get the transition, you can. The important part of this, though, is that you have to let this dry for a couple seconds. I mean, since it's really hot today, the markers are drying up pretty fast, and so you can get a better view of what the markers look like. And I felt like I wasn't getting enough of a darker value range, and so I thought to myself, ooh, I should go in there with the technical pen and put just a little bit more with the black at the very, very start to get that one more pop of value transition. Again, that's not required. That's not necessary. It was just one of those things where I was like, oh, I really want to see if I could build a little bit more contrast. And then I took the darkest value marker I have, and I went back in and I added a little bit more value. Again, just going back over it again, It gives a little bit more darkness, but you can already see towards the back, whereas the value is dark, that there's a little bit of bleed that's happening with the marker. So you really want to be conscious of overworking and over drawing back into it. But that's pretty much it.